Why you mad? Fix your face. Hey, everybody, welcome to The Whole Truth, where I am taking you through the entire Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation without skipping anything. So if that sounds good to you, reach down, hit the little subscribe button below, and then you can head over to thewholetruthbiblestudy.com. You'll find all the videos in one convenient location. Other Bible studies are getting uploaded. They're slower than I'd like to, but they're coming. I promise they're coming. I'm getting ready to upload Song of Solomon over there as a whole video set. And including all the study notes. And so I'm just really excited about what's happening over there and hope that you'll go visit. And if you want to support the channel and what I'm doing here, trying to get as many people as I can into God's Word, if you want to support that, you can do it over at Patreon, and you get all the study notes, like what will go along with this video today from 1 Samuel chapter 18, and we'll go through verse 11. So verses 5 through 11 today. We went 1 to 4 in yesterday's video, and today we're going to go through verses 5 through 11. And it's the rise of David. What's happening in this series right now is David, who will one day be the king, is moving from shepherd boy into a position of prominence and popularity. And as he gets there, he does something very interesting, something that we really don't see today. He behaves, as the Bible says, wisely. He's not conceited. He's not puffed up with pride. He stays humble, and the Lord continues to bless him. And what we also see is how the King Saul, reacts to David's rise in power and in authority and in popularity. And so today we get this kind of really famous part of the text where these women begin to sing a song with David and with Saul, and Saul sees it as a challenge to his throne. And he gets really angry. I opened this video saying, "Why you mad? Fix your face," because I guess there was a song. I don't know. Maybe you know what the song was. I don't know. But it was on in a store. My late wife was in the store with our kids, and there was this one part of the song. You couldn't really make out the rest of it, but there's this one part of the song that the person sang or rapped or whatever it was. "Why you mad? Fix your face." That's what it said in the video. "Why you mad? Fix your face." Or I said video. In the song it said, "Why you mad? Fix your face." And my kids heard that and laughed and laughed and laughed, and they brought it home. And so from that point on, whenever somebody would get mad around my house, we would go, "Why you mad? Fix your face." And so it's just a funny line that we all just held to. And that's kind of what we see here. We see anger cause all kinds of problems throughout the Bible. People doing something because they're angry, doing something because they're mad, and then it ended up being a rash decision and something bad happened. All the way back at the near the beginning with the story of Cain and Abel, as Cain got mad at he got mad because his sacrifice wasn't accepted, and the Lord was like, "Well, you don't have to be mad. You can do right." But then he said this. He said, "But if you don't, sin lies at the door, like crouches at the door, and it waits for you." Well, Cain didn't fix his face. He stayed mad, and he ended up killing his brother. We see a similar kind of a thing happening today with Saul and with David. Let's just read the story first. It's 1 Samuel chapter 18, and we're going to read verses 5 through 11. "So David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved wisely, and Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, also in the sight of Saul's servant. And now it happened, as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the women had come out of the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. And so the women sang as they danced and said, 'Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s.' And then Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him. And he said, 'They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom?' And so Saul eyed David from that day forward. And it happened on the next day that the distressing spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. And so David played music with his hand as at other times, but there was a spear in Saul's hand. And Saul cast the spear, for he said, 'I will pin David to the wall.' But David escaped his presence twice. Actually, I want to read just a little further. Now, Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but he had departed from Saul, and therefore Saul removed him from his presence and made him captain over 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David behaved wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Now, the study today, I'm only taking through verse 11, but I saw that ending there where we saw again that David behaved wisely before the Lord. Let's just start out with where this started, because this is kind of a roller coaster ride that we're on right now with David. David's life started as a shepherd boy. He was humbled in his life. He was humbled in his lifestyle, and he was a humble man and young man. He was 15 or 16 years old. He was anointed by Samuel the prophet, and yet he went back to being a shepherd. He gets invited to come into the king's house and play music for the king when the king's struggling, and he does so. Even though he's been anointed as king, he humbles himself, and he comes and he plays with Saul, and we're seeing as David is like getting put into a position where now he's around Saul. Now he's around the king. Then there's the story with Goliath, and David kills Goliath, and then ends up making a covenant with Jonathan, the son of Saul. And then you can see that. So what happened is, then picking up in verse 5, after the Goliath situation, Saul kept David in his presence. David didn't go home to his dad anymore. He didn't go back to the sheep anymore. And now he becomes a man of war. A lot of time is elapsing in the few verses between chapter 17, David and Goliath, and where we are now, where Saul is sending David out to go to battle. David was a fearless young man. He was humble, but he was fearless. He was meek, but he was strong. All of these characteristics and traits that you can see a picture of Christ. But I don't have time to get into all of that right now. I'm just going to say that this is the character of who this guy David really is. And so I hope you're seeing that picture of who he is. And so David is going out to war, and obviously, because of what happens in the story, there has been a lot of fighting, not infighting, not David and Saul. David and Saul have been on great terms. Saul is sending out David, and David is climbing the ranks in the Israeli ladder, in the Israeli army. Do you understand that? He went from like killing Goliath, gaining popularity, but now he goes out and he goes to war, and he's literally beating and winning against these Philistines. And not only is he beating and winning against the Philistines, he's becoming known. People are recognizing who he is. And I want you to notice, excuse me for coughing, but I want you to notice what happened in verse 5. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved wisely. And Saul set him as a man, over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So David is being sent out. Now remember, David is the future king. He knows that he's the future king. He has been anointed by Samuel. He full on has that memory. How long has it been from the time he was anointed until the time he killed Goliath? I don't know. Maybe it was a year. Maybe it was a few months, whatever it was. There was at least 40 days because the people heard for 40 days as Goliath taunted them for 40 days. But either way, David killed Goliath when he was but a youth. That's what Saul said to him. He said, "You're but a youth, but this Goliath, he's been at war. He's been fighting since he was a youth. He's been a man of war since before he was your age." Well, that was of no never mind to David, and David went into that battle anyways, but now David is being sent out over and over again. He comes back to the palace, and he's won the victory, and everybody's triumphing, everybody's cheering, everybody's clapping, everybody's applauding, and everybody's happy because like David is doing the thing that everyone would want, which is delivering the people from the oppressors, which is the Philistines at this time. The Philistines are the ones who are oppressing the Israelite people. And so David is going out and delivering Israel, the whole nation. He's part of the deliverance. And again, he wins battles and wins battles and wins battles. Can we just stop for just a moment and recognize something? That favor follows faithfulness. You have to be faithful in the small things. You have to be faithful in the things, in the place that God has put you in. Notice that David behaved wisely. Like, just think about that term for a minute. What would it mean to behave wisely? Well, I want you to think about people who come into a position of fame or popularity today and what they do with that. How often do you see people come into a position of fame and popularity, and it goes to their heads and they become these like difficult people to be around. They're whether it's just being a prima donna, or whether it's, being hard to deal with, or whether it's, them thinking that they're the absolute best at something, or them going out and just living wild lifestyles because they feel like they can. They think they're above the law, or they think they're above other people, or whatever. I mean, how often do we see that happen? Have you ever seen as someone maybe has been in that scenario, like a famous person that you were like, man, I really used to like him, but now he turned into whatever? I've seen it happen with celebrities. I've seen it happen with pastors turning into celebrity pastors. I mean, that's the thing that I have in my own head, is to, even now, I think to myself, I want to make sure that I always remain the humble person that I want to be. He humbled himself. I want to do the same. And so that's what we're seeing out of David. Not that if he had gone out and he had like turned into this kind of puffed up with pride, and I'm somebody special, and I'm the anointed one, you better listen to me because one day I'm going to end up being your king, all of those things. If that was David, that wouldn't have been wise, right? So then what does it mean that he behaved wisely? It means that he remained humble. He was going out and fighting these battles and people were triumphing him, but you know what? He was still humble David. He was still kind. He was still treating people well. He was he was still worshiping the Lord and giving God the glory. He was still a man after God's own heart. He wasn't letting his fame and popularity and success go to his head. And because of that, he was faithful to where God put him. You see, many times what breaks that faithfulness is the fact that we get in a rush to go where we think we're supposed to be, or to get to the point that we think we're supposed to be. Now let that sink in, what I just said. How often do we ruin something by getting in a rush instead of trusting the Lord's timing? David was anointed as king. He's proven himself as a worthy opponent in battle. And obviously this has been happening for years, and yet he behaved wisely. And so favor followed. David is now ascending in the ranks in the army. People are knowing him. And comes up to this point, we're still here in the same story. And now in verse 6, pick up with me in verse 6, it happened again. I'm just going to start over. Now it had happened as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the women had come out of the cities of Israel singing and dancing. Listen, to meet King Saul. The women were coming out singing and dancing. They were coming to meet King Saul. They had tambourines, and they were with joy and musical instruments, and the women sang and danced. And here's what they sang: Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him. And he said, to David they've ascribed 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. Just pause for a second. I'm going to say this. Actually, I haven't even preached this sermon yet. I'm going to preach this tomorrow. Now, by the time you see this, I will have already preached the sermon in church. But there's something that's in my head that's very interesting here. Think about this. If those women had come out and they had sang a song and they had said, Saul has killed his thousands, Saul has killed his thousands, Saul has killed his thousands, Saul would have stood there. He would have loved that song. He would have been so happy at the idea of Saul has killed his thousands. That the problem doesn't come in because Saul has killed his thousands. These women, this was innocent from these women. They were not comparing. They were not trying to make a statement. They were not taking a dig. To say that a soldier, to say that a king had slain his thousand was a big statement. How many kings had not even entered into battle? How many kings would somebody have to say, well, he's slain 10, but Saul has slain his thousands? They're singing this as if Israel is coming into the place that they should be. Their king has slain his thousands, and his commander, even though David's not a commander yet, he'll become one, but I'm going to say that, like his soldier, his star soldier, has killed his tens of thousands. Israel's doing well. They've got joy and musical instruments. They are not taking a dig at Saul. They're singing a song of praise because it's patriotic. They're happy about what's been happening in their country. But that's not what Saul heard, is it? Saul gets angry. I mean, we're told exactly why he gets angry. He was displeased. You can almost imagine they're out there singing, they're dancing, and they're like, Saul has killed his thousands. And here's the thing that makes him mad. And David's killed his 10,000s. Now, they just mean it in the truth of what it is. And yet Saul, you can almost see his face turn. They're saying that David killed 10,000, but they're saying I only killed thousands. His problem is the comparison. I've said this before, but I'll say it again because it's worth saying, that comparison is the thief of joy. That's what happened here. Saul has kind of an eye-opening moment where he begins to realize that David is gaining, in his eyes, more popularity, more fame than himself. And so Saul begins to eye David from that day forward. Like now, all of a sudden, Saul doesn't really like David like he used to. Saul's not impressed with David like he used to be impressed, because now Saul's realizing, wait a minute, David's got more popularity than I have. Can I just say this? I have it this way in my study notes. Insecurity can't celebrate someone else's victories. Insecurity can't celebrate someone else's victories. Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And that kind of insecurity blinded Saul. And so really, I think there's a personal question that you could ask yourself, a personal application that you could ask yourself here, which is this: can you celebrate in someone else's victories? I think that's something to just pay attention to for a second. Think about the comparison between the two. Here's David, who has the fame, has the popularity, and what is he doing with it? He's humbling himself. He's behaving wisely. Here's Saul, who is the king in Israel, but yet he becomes so enraged because a soldier in his army is the star soldier. Let me say it like this. Let's like flip it around for a second. So does that mean that Saul wants soldiers that can't fight? Does that mean that Saul wants soldiers that can't win in battle? Does that mean he wants soldiers that maybe win sometimes, but then they die? Wouldn't he say, like, think about this for a moment. Wouldn't, if all of Saul's best soldiers constantly died in battle, and then they had to wait for another new star soldier to rise up, but then he has to die in battle, because otherwise, what's the alternative? Then Saul's going to cry out and say, God, why don't you provide me with soldiers that can actually fight? God, like, why am I missing the thing? Have you ever considered that sometimes we get sometimes we get jealous about getting the thing that we want, or we get upset about getting the thing that we thought we wanted? I mean, this is the height of insecurity. Let me tell you a true story. I remember once a pastor, he wanted to host a relatively small church, and he hosted a barbecue. He wanted to invite people to a barbecue. And so he hosted this barbecue at the church, like a church cookout, and double the attendance showed up for the cookout. Compared to a typical Bible study or, Sunday night or Wednesday night or whatever, double the amount of people showed up because there was hot dogs and hamburgers. And you could literally see the annoyance. Like, you could tell he was annoyed in the middle of the barbecue. Like, you could tell there was something wrong. He was on edge. And he got up the following Sunday and he made this comment to his congregation. He said, well, you'll show up for a barbecue, but you won't show up for a Bible study. Well, interestingly, all the people who were there had shown up for the Bible study and the barbecue. I remember I went home and I remember saying to my wife, hey, but what was the alternative? Do you want to host a barbecue and then nobody come to the barbecue? Won't you then be annoyed and say, well, we try to do church things and we try to do fellowship things, but then nobody comes? And so, what isn't the goal of having the barbecue? Isn't the goal of that to fellowship with fellow believers and bring people closer in a closer relationship to the church, which then can bring them to a closer relationship with Christ? I mean, isn't that the point of what you wanted? I feel like that's a catch-22. You're literally irritated that people have come to the barbecue, but you'd also be irritated if they didn't come to the barbecue. Now, that's an example of a real scenario, but I just wonder, is there anything in your life that you have found yourself in this place of insecurity where you've been upset about gaining the thing that you actually wanted? That's what Saul would want, the star soldier, but he's upset and he's irritated because the star soldier fights more battles and has slain more Philistines than he has slain. Well, what happens next? So we round out the story with this: the anger and the wrath is wailing up inside of Saul, so much that he's eyeing David. Well, it happens in verse 10, and it happened on the next day that the distressing spirit from God came upon Saul. And so the women had sang that day. And so, Saul, we get this kind of future cast of like Saul's going to, from that day forward, he's eyeing David. But it's the very next day after the singing episode. The ladies have just sang this song. And it's the very next day. Saul it's reeling in his head, and this evil spirit comes upon Saul again, and Saul's got a spear in his hands. Saul has been walking around the palace, murmuring and muttering It says that he's prophesying, but the word there really means more like murmuring or muttering. So you can almost hear him like, Saul is slain his thousands, Saul is slain his thousands, David slain his tens of thousands, and the Lord's taken his anointing off of me. Well, you can almost hear him, like, is David the anointed one now? And, you can hear his kind of murmurings and his anger. Well, they can tell this distressing spirit is upon Saul again. So what do? They go and get David. They don't realize that it's only the next day. They don't realize that it's all the anger is against David. So David goes in, they're all like, ooh, he's got a spear in there, David. You're the only one who can calm him down with your harp. David goes in with his harp, and listen to this. It's in verse 10. God, this distressing spirit from God had come upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. And so David played music with his harp as at other times, but there was a spear in Saul's hand, and Saul cast the spear. For he said, listen to what he says, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped his presence twice. Saul was so angry, he literally tried to kill the very one who just a few years earlier, before all these battles, a few years earlier when they were all trembling and thought they were done at the sight of Goliath. David, who had slain Goliath, David, who has gone out to every battle that Saul has sent him to and fought with veracity and fought with all his might and fought with all his skill, and has never demonstrated in humility. He's never demonstrated that he had any pride. He's never demonstrated that he even wanted to come close to the throne. And yet Saul cannot help but out of his anger, he's so angry that try to pin David to the wall. He literally tries to kill his star soldier. Could you imagine what the rest of the nation would have thought if Saul had killed David with the spear in the palace that day? My goodness, can you imagine what would have happened? But it didn't matter. He was blinded. I think there's an application though for us that when we get blinded by anger, do we start throwing spears? That is what can happen. That's the danger. That's what happened with Cain, with the story of Cain and Abel. And that's what sometimes happens with you and I. We get so blinded by our anger that then we start throwing darts at people, but sometimes people who aren't even expecting it. Even here recently, I can't tell you how many conversations in the last couple of months. I almost wish Kelly was doing this with me as I could get her to verify what I'm about to tell you, that in the past couple of months, I cannot tell you the number of people who have become irate with me. And then I sit down and talk with them and I say to them, I had no idea you were angry. I had no idea. Like I didn't know. And yet they're like on the sidelines almost seething because I've, said something or done something, or in so many cases haven't done something, something they expected me to do as a pastor or as a friend or as a neighbor or whatever. And, they're upset with me because I didn't do the thing that they expected me to do. And it's been very interesting that in all of that, it always keeps being brought up, that in all these conversations I've had, it keeps being brought up. Well, we know that you're on social media and we know that you've got a lot of people. We know that your church is growing. We know that you've got all this, and it's always interesting that I'm like, well, wait a second. You're so blinded by your anger that you can see maybe why I did do or didn't do the thing that I did, but yet y'all just understand, it's not like I've gone out and done something and then, didn't realize these people knew it. I'm telling you, like, I'm just living my life over here. It's like, and then all of a sudden I've got somebody, I'm going to use a petty example to give you an illustration. It's like, I'm sitting over here washing my car, not realizing I'm making people mad because I washed my car. And so, it's like, what is happening? But listen, this is what I'm trying to say to you. And I'm guilty of the same thing. How many times have I found myself, I get blinded by some irritation, some anger? How many times, let's do it like this. How many times have you ever had a scenario where how many times have you had a scenario where, you went out in your car, you're driving, and you're having a conversation with yourself about this person, like how you think this is going to go with this person. Have you ever realized like how much of an assumption that is? Like I don't know if you've ever done that, but you leave that in the comments if you've ever done that. Have you ever had the conversation with yourself, like prepping yourself for the argument, maybe with your husband, your wife, your kids, whatever, and you're like prepping yourself for what you're going to say and how you're going to say it and all the things. Think about what you're doing in that though. All the assumptions you make that they're going to say this, and when they say this, I'm going to say this, right? How often do we let our anger blind us to maybe what reality and the truth really is. And so I would just encourage you with this. David behaved wisely. Even after Saul tried to pin him to the wall with a spear, David he became commander, as we'll see in the next video, and we read at the end of there. David will end up becoming a commander over 1,000. Saul will remove him from his presence, but David will not. He will still behave wisely. He doesn't turn on Saul. He doesn't become puffed up with pride. He doesn't try to ascend the throne for himself. He simply waits on the Lord to do what the Lord had promised him he was going to do. That's what I would encourage you to do today. If you're in that boat today, wait on the Lord, trust in his plan, and he will see it through. The one who began a good work in you will see it through to the end. All right, I hope you've enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you tomorrow as we wrap up 1 Samuel chapter 18. See you then.